Here I am discussing the current affairs topics from the subject Environment and Energy. First topic selected is Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure or CDRI. This is important because India has proposed such alliance in the international scenario. So recently we are seeing India is taking initiative like this. International Solar Alliance we have seen last year. Similarly, this is a major idea put forward by India in UN. When this happened in September 2019, UN Secretary General called for a summit. So summit is the meeting of the heads of the countries. So it is the leaders will be meeting here. The aim was to discuss the status, like UN Secretary General wants the countries to come with solid commitments for the UNFCCC, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and Paris Agreement, which says that post 2020 countries will embark on a different regime other than the Kyoto regime. So Kyoto regime is ending in 2020. So post 2020 we have to come up with a solid framework, rules, ambitions, targets, etc. So for encouraging the countries to take up ambitious targets and commitments, UN summit was called. So recently in December 2019, COP 25 was held. So about COP 24, we have discussed in our previous current affairs lectures. It was held in December 2018. So next COP was in December 2019. That is also over. So before this COP 25, we have to finalize the rule book of the Paris Agreement. And in this summit, our Prime Minister Sri Narendra Modi has launched this initiative, that is CDRI. So what is the logic of launching such disaster resilient infrastructure alliance? It's because with the climate change, we are seeing frequent extreme events like floods, cyclones, droughts, etc. And the worldwide, every country is not affected in the same manner. The poor countries are affected more because they will be lying in the tropics, that is affected with more extreme events. Also their economic development is not that great, so they are not able to come back after a disaster. So once a disaster occurs, the main thing is that we have to revive the society, economy after the disaster. That is a big task, and usually government is responsible for this. So immediate response to the disaster as well as post-disaster settlement, resettlement also government's responsibility. So for example, when a cyclone occurs, people will be moved to the camps, their houses will be damaged, there will be loss of lives, there will be diseases spreading. So government will spend a lot of money for disaster relief. Account shows that almost 66% of the money that government is sending during a disaster is going to recover the infrastructure. So we are familiar, trees will fall, the power lines will damage, communication lines will damage, roads will damage. So these are all part of infrastructure. So we have to rebuild the infrastructure post disaster. So when these disasters are becoming frequent, this is a loss for the government. This is a very huge expense on the part of the government. But instead, if you are going for disaster resilient infrastructure, it is easy to recover. For example, if the power lines are laid underground, supplying back power will be easy because the cables will be undamaged. So this is one example. And similarly, if we have roads that are not getting damaged in floods, so post disaster it is very easy to come back to the normal life. So there are three types of infrastructures. It is social infrastructure, economic infrastructure and ecological infrastructure. So these three infrastructures we have to take care. Social infrastructure means there will be different institutions that people will be depending on, like schools, public health centers, workplaces. They have to get easy access to the workplaces. That also safe and easy access to the workplaces. These economic infrastructures include power lines, roads, like that. Ecological infrastructure is forests or any other ecological systems or any other systems of ecological significance. That is, for example, there will be trees on the coastal lines that will be protecting the communities living there from heavy winds. If those trees are damaged during a tsunami, we have to restore it back. So this type of infrastructures we have to take care of. In this part are covered infrastructure risk management. So what are the risks to infrastructures we have to manage? Standards for different infrastructures and buildings and different constructions, materials, that standardization. Then recovery mechanisms, financing. These are the aspects that this CDRI will take care of. So it was started with 12 initial member countries plus some UN agencies, banks like World Bank, NGOs, academia. So many people are supporting this. 12 countries are Australia, Bhutan, Fiji, Indonesia, Italy, Japan, Maldives, Mexico, Mongolia, Rwanda, Sri Lanka, United Kingdom. What is the aim? Aim is to decrease the economic losses during disasters. So this needs certain policy changes from the part of the government. For example, while laying a road, government can make it mandatory that power line should be laid underground, road material standards, so many things. It will come from the policy side of the government. Also, it should involve local people, national governments, and also cooperation in the international level. So as the initial corpus for the CDRI, Government of India has allotted rupees 480 crore. How CDRI will help countries? It will help countries to upgrade their existing system, retrofit, that is removing the existing system and fitting with the disaster resilient systems, and follow the sustainable development goals. This UN principle is not leaving anybody. So it will have particular emphasis on vulnerable regions and vulnerable people, like safe access to drinking water to all the people, health for all the people, education for all the people. So such are the aims of SDG. So this kind of initiative will help to achieve the SDG goal also. So this CDRI will emphasize on knowledge about the disasters, risk reduction, risk identification, technology for the resilient infrastructure, then standards, compliances, capacity building, this kind of things CDRI will focus on. So it will help to achieve the aims of SDGs, then Paris commitment on climate change. Thus we have two components, adaptation and mitigation. So can you tell the CDRI will be focusing on which aspect? Adaptation or mitigation? It is adaptation, right? So once the this climate related disasters are inevitable, so we have to adapt to them. Next topic is UNFCCC COP. So UNFCCC is United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So this is the framework convention which is dealing with the climate change related activities at the global level. So it is one of the Rio Earth Summit outcomes. So there were three major outcomes. One was about climate change, one was about biodiversity, and one was about desertification, land management. So this is one of the main convention that came out during the Rio Earth Summit. And the parties to this convention, those who have signed this convention, will meet once in a year. So it is called Conference of Parties. It is called COP. So now 25th COP has happened in December 2019. It happened in Spain, but the hosting country was Chile. So Chile has hosted it in Spain. So this COP is important because it marks a transition from pre-2020 Kyoto Protocol regime to post-2020 Paris Agreement regime. So here Kyoto Protocol validity is ending in 2020. So 2015 COP countries have agreed on a landmark Paris Agreement which have changed the terms and conditions on how climate change management was happening till now. All the countries were taken into board. Earlier in Kyoto Protocol only developed countries were committed for the climate change mitigation actions. So now all the countries are supposed to pledge their national commitments in Paris Agreement. So the Paris Agreement will be coming to full force from 2020. So before 2020 we have to finalize the rules how this will happen as per the Paris Agreement. So it is called a rule book. So Paris rule book was not finalized in 2015. So time was given up to 2020. But in this recent COP also it ended up in not finalizing any solid rules, because in our classes we have discussed that regarding climate change there are a lot of difference between different countries, among developed countries, developing countries, pre-2020 commitments. Who will do that? Can it be carried forward? So who is accountable for the already happened carbon dioxide emissions? So developed countries are not willing to take responsibility of the carbon dioxide emissions that have happened so far. Now all the countries, including poor countries, those have not contributed much to the carbon dioxide emissions, are also put into the same board. They all have to work together, then only this disaster can be managed. So there exists a lot of difference between the approach of different countries. So this COP also ended up in not finalizing anything solid. So this rule book was mainly to come up with the rules for the carbon market. So in Kyoto Protocol we had joint implementation, common development mechanism, clean development mechanism, etc. When on countries achieving emission reduction targets, it can sell its quota, it can sell its excess carbon dioxide emissions reduction that it has achieved to the countries that have not achieved, so that the other countries can also come within the quota that has allotted to them, and the people who are achieving more reduction can get some credits, finance, because of their achievement. So, these mechanisms have resulted in double counting. So when a country is implementing CDM, clean development mechanism, in another country, or selling the carbon credits to another country, what was happening is that reduction was accounting in both the countries accounting. So the both countries were showing that they have reduced this much of carbon dioxide emissions, but actually in actual scenario this emission reduction is happening only once, but they are being accounted twice. So that loophole was there. So the countries have come up has to come up with a mechanism to plug that loophole, but still some countries are opposing that. They will continue to trade with the CDM. CDM is supposed to end with the Kyoto Protocol regime. New rule has to come up, and there is disagreement in that who will be accounting for that emission reductions, and how the emission reductions are calculated. Is this joint implementation mechanisms and CDM are actually achieving emission reductions or what? So there is a question mark how it is accounted, this emission reduction, how it is accounted. We have to show some solid improvements in the practical scenario, right? We are not satisfied with the book accounts also. We have to reduce the carbon dioxide emissions, but these account books are showing something different. So this loophole has to be plugged. And the carbon market should be opened, like in stock market where the other stock bonds are exchanged, shares are bought and sold, like that. This carbon credit should also be able to come up in the open carbon market. So that rules also we have to finalize. And another sticky point is channel of finance. So the developed countries are supposed to give financial assistance to the poor countries that are suffering from the climate change related damages. So they are at the sufferer end and it is not because of their fault. So they are asking finance to compensate their loss and damage. So how to quantify this loss and damage? How to get a finance? So who will give commitment? So the developed countries are not giving solid commitment that they will be financing the loss and damage. This will be Warsaw International Mechanism. There was agreement on loss and damage, but those things are also not yet finalized. How to account that, who will finance, also not finalized. But a new financial facility was established now in this scope, and there is a network, Santiago network of the poor countries. They will come up with some measures to reduce the risk and reduce the loss and damage because of the climate changes. And another thing was that the countries were supposed to come up with climate pledges. So for Paris Agreement, India also come up with pledge, right? India's INDC we have discussed in last year current affairs. What were the commitments made by India? Similarly, each and every country has come up with some pledges according to their capacity. But added all these countries' commitments added up, and how much emission reductions it will cause, and how much is our target, that is not matching. Our aim is to keep the temperature rise within 2 degrees Celsius. We should not allow the global warming to rise more than 2 degrees Celsius from the pre-industrial era. We are taking pre-industrial period as the benchmark. So from we are selecting pre-industrial period as the benchmark. From the pre-industrial period, we should not allow the temperature to rise above 2 degrees Celsius. So for achieving these targets, how much emissions reduction should happen? That is, the actual emission reduction should happen. And this is the commitment by the different countries. And the difference between this is called emissions gap. So even after these pledges are added up together, compared with the desired emission reduction, there is a gap. How to cover this gap? Each countries have to increase their pledges, right? So they have to share what is the gap amount, and they have to increase the pledges. So there was an agreement that by 2020, the countries will enhance their pledges from that Paris Agreement. But nothing has happened in this direction. No countries were seen interested in increasing their pledges. So they are telling that we have already committed what is maximum possible for us, or these itself are ambitious targets for us. So beyond that, we are not able to commit more. So the revision of the climate pledges also not happened. So the Secretary General said he was disappointed with the outcome of the COP25, and we saw just before this COP25, he called a UN summit also to bring the leaders to encourage them for more climate change actions, more solid action. But this was rather disappointing in that direction. and smaller agreements like gender action plan and some action plan for the indigenous communities for adapting to the climate change. Like that, some agreements have happened, but what we expected, the major agreements could not be finalized in this COP also. So it is postponed for 1 more year for the countries to come to an agreement. Next one is the Convention on Biological Diversity COP. So this is 14th COP. So we saw that this CBD also originated from Rio Summit, but we saw that UNFCCC has 25th COP, but this is only COP 14. It is because this COP happens only once in 2 years, unlike UNFCCC. On UNFCCC, this COP is once in 2 years. So 14th COP has been conducted in Egypt. So this COP is not much important in the ESE point of view, but you have to know about what is this convention, what are the main aim of the convention, what are the related protocols, because questions can come from that side. So we have seen in ESE exams, they are going for international conventions related questions. So you have to understand what is CBD, what are the major aims of CBD. It is for conservation of biodiversity and sustainable use of biodiversity and fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising out of biodiversity. Conservation means we have to preserve, but at the same time we have to utilize it also. We can't put a wall between us and the biodiversity, so that we should not touch it, so that it will be preserved. It is not like that. We should use the resources, because in biodiversity we are dependent for food, medicines, recreation, etc. We are dependent on even agriculture, pollination. So many things are there that we are dependent. So we have to use the biodiversity. That should be sustainable use. We should not damage the biodiversity in that process, but rather we should also help in preserving the biodiversity or enhancing the biodiversity or restoring the biodiversity, at the same time use it. So when we are using it, that benefit should be shared. It should not be concentrated on few hands. For example, if an international company is coming up with a certain product, say a medicine, so who will be getting the commercial benefits out of the company? When they are selling the medicines more, they will be getting. But where they are getting that medicine from? It is from the nature. So who is preserving the nature? In most cases, this kind of medicinal plants will be preserved by the local communities. So the effort taken by the local community for generations should be considered. So the benefit should be shared with them also. So for that purpose, we have come up with different regulations, institutions, different protocols. So under Nagoya Protocol, each and every country who is party to that have established their national mechanisms to ensure that fair and equitable sharing of the biodiversity, benefits out of biodiversity resources happens. So accordingly, we have National Biodiversity Agency. We should authorize the use of these biotic resources so that they can ensure that local communities are also getting benefit. And we have come up with traditional knowledge library. So if any other country is making false claims that biodiversity is theirs, we can put that case in the international arbitration mechanisms and get benefits. So like this, mechanisms are already established under this convention, and it deals with biodiversity also. Biotechnology also. Like every technology, this biotechnology also have its own ethical concerns. So how far we can go? How far we can modify the organisms? How far we can modify the genes? What is the regulations for such organisms to be released into the nature? Will it cause any damage? Is there any precaution in case the genetically modified organisms are coming to the nature and damaging the ecosystem? What we will do? What are the precautions we are taking? So it is going on a precautionary approach. Precautionary approach that living modified organisms. There is restrictions on the movement of the living modified organisms from one country to another. So the countries can be aware if in case some organisms are transported to its territory, if it is without its knowledge, they can ban it. They can say no. So that is covered under this Cartagena protocol. So these two are the main protocols under this convention. So in this recent COP, countries have agreed that they will come up with voluntary biodiversity commitments before the next COP. So they have to make the national commitments for these aims. And another point discussed was the common resource management. The commons are like, it is not any private resource like land, air, water, etc. We can't tell like it is belonging to someone. So there should be a common responsibility to conserve these resources. So this resource management, how it can be managed, how it can be put in the hands of the local people efficiently. So there is a principle called creative destruction. So when we allow the local people to manage the resources with enough knowledge, the resource management which is not effective will not be taken forward. So only the resource management that is beneficial to the people will be. Next we can see about the Basel Convention COP. So this Basel Convention also have conference of parties. So in recent COP some changes have happened. That's why this is important. So along with the Basel Convention COP, Rotterdam Convention and the Stockholm Convention COP also happened in the same venue. So these are three conventions related to what we call as hazardous chemicals or waste, hazardous substances. First let us see what is the difference between these three conventions. Basel Convention is about restrictions on transboundary movements of hazardous and other waste. Transboundary means from boundary of one country to another country. So when it is moving from one country to another country, internationally there are certain restrictions on the movement of the hazardous substances. So these conventions deal with what is a hazardous substance. So there will be a list as agreed upon by the parties. It will list what are the waste that is agreed as hazardous waste. So the countries cannot simply dump the hazardous substances on other countries. Normally what happens is, for recycling, waste from the rich countries will come to the poor countries, because in poor countries recycling is very cost effective and the rich countries may not be having that much intensity to invest in waste recycling industry. In poor countries more labor is available and we need more opportunities for work, so they will dump the waste. So as per this convention, to the countries who are parties, they cannot simply dump the hazardous waste, so it is prohibited. So for example, there is plastic, e-waste, etc. and chemicals are there, hazardous chemicals are there. So earlier plastic was not included under this convention as a hazardous substance. So what happens? Plastic recycling was outsourced. Countries like India will import plastic waste and they will recycle it. But what is happening? These countries will dump the plastic waste in other countries. Their countries don't have enough facility to recycle those waste, and this waste will end up in landfills or in the oceans. So in effect, the whole globe is getting adversely affected because of this unscientific dumping. So now under this, when the COP happened, they have included plastic waste also under the hazardous waste, so that dumping of plastic waste is restricted. That means if two countries are agreeing to each other that we will recycle the plastic waste, they can take. But without the consent of the country, another country cannot dump. So after this, our government has come up with ban on plastic waste. That news we have seen it in our earlier current affairs video that India has banned import of plastic waste. Earlier it was allowed in special economic zones. Now in special economic zones also we are not allowing the plastic waste import. So this kind of stance will get a support from this convention. So any country can say no to the import of such waste. So other waste also dealt in this convention. They are household waste and incinerator ash. How to deal with this waste also, certain guidelines are there. That is Basel. Rotterdam Convention is about prior informed consent procedure. Prior informed consent. That means if any country is transporting chemicals from one that country to another country, the receiving country should be aware of what the chemicals they are sending, what are its side effects, whether it is hazardous or not. So this kind of information that country should be provided. So the exporting country should provide the importing country all the details about the chemicals, whether it is banned internationally, whether it is banned in any other country. So such kind of details should be provided. Then only other country can take a decision whether to allow the transport of that chemical to that country. Because there are different chemical formulations. Many governments may not be aware of the harmful effect of that chemicals. It may be used in food industry, it may be used in medical drug industry. So without knowing the consequences, they may end up in importing the chemicals. But it should not be like that. There should be an informed consent. So the parties have to give an informed consent for the import of such chemicals. That is dealt in this Rotterdam Convention. That is, they have established a procedure for getting this consent, what are the mandatory things they have to inform, and how they can take decisions. So it is not a upright ban on the import of the chemicals, but it is restrictions in trade. So in the trade, when trade happens, both parties should be aware of. Stockholm Convention is about persistent organic pollutants. So this thing we have discussed in our classes. What are these persistent organic pollutants? They are certain chemicals that will stay in the environment intact for a long time. It will end up in the living cells. So it will cause biomagnification. So biomagnification is dangerous because once the concentration of such chemicals is, it will cause certain genetic disorders, cancers, tumors like that. So, aim of this convention is to eliminate the use of such POPs. They have identified some 12 POPs that has to be eliminated. For example, we have DDT. DDT is not in use now. When I was a child, there were rampant use of DDT as a pesticide. So such kind of chemicals this convention has identified. First, we will try to reduce the use of the chemicals, then slowly eliminate the use of the chemicals, and slowly it should completely eliminate the production and use of the chemicals from the earth. That is the aim of this Stockholm Convention. Now we can come back to the Basel Convention. So what are the changes recently added? It included plastic waste also. So there were guidelines on how to handle electrical and electronic waste, and certain discriminations between waste and non-waste, what is waste, what is non-waste. So correct guidelines they have updated. This way the updates happened. And there was UN Accord also. Member of the United Nations has agreed upon to regulate the export of plastic waste. For the regulating the export of plastic waste, we already have a convention. So it is legally binding. Instead of UN simply telling the countries not to export, if it is a legally binding treaty or legally binding convention, it can be implemented easily, right? So according to this UN Accord, they have amended the Basel Convention so as to include the plastic waste also. So this regulating the export of plastic waste is legally binding on the countries. And other decisions taken in this UN Accord was eliminating certain chemicals. It is better to call as group of chemicals like dicophol and perfluorooctanonic acid. So this thing you can remember because in exam there may be questions like this. For example, in UPSC civil service exam, there were question on brominated compounds where they are used. So this compound, it is used in non-stick cookware. But it is a poisonous chemical. It is used in food processing industries and some other industries. So we have to eliminate the use of this chemical. You can remember its name and you can remember the use also. So it will be useful in exam. Even if it is not in the ESE exam, any other competitive exam, in GK side you can expect this kind of question. So far we were discussing the international conventions that has happened during this year, that is the conference of parties have happened during this year. So next comes the UN Convention to Combat Desertification. This is one of the 3 conventions that we have discussed before, which was the outcome of the Rio summit. So it was about biodiversity CBD, otherwise climate change UNFCCC, and next is about land, that is UN Convention to Combat Desertification. So these 3 are interrelated also. That is, biodiversity has its relation with the land management. Both has relation with climate change. So these are the main areas that Rio Summit has identified that time. Before we have discussed about other 2 conventions, and this is UNCCD. It is important now because this time this convention COP was hosted by India. So this COP happened in Noida, Greater Noida. So that make this convention more important in exam perspective than other 2 conventions. So let us see what is this convention about, what is meant by desertification, and what are the things that are getting discussed in the recent COP. Regarding desertification, we can tell like when a land loses its capacity to support the vegetation, we can tell like it has become a desert. So this desert don't have the physical meaning like the actual desert. It doesn't mean that the land we are seeing suddenly become a desert like a sand desert or rock desert. It doesn't mean like that, but it mentions about the loss of fertility or loss of ability of the soil to support vegetation and other life. So it is equivalent to the desert, that is the productivity it will lose. So this is one of the major challenge that mainly dry lands are facing. What are dry lands? Dry lands, from the name itself it is clear that the place is dry, that is it is devoid of moisture, it is devoid of water. The rainfall received by these lands is less than what the water is evaporating from it. So it is losing more water than it is receiving. So it will become arid. Arid means dry. So arid land, there are certain criteria. How much will be the evaporation rate, how much is the rainfall rate. So we will calculate the difference and categorize the land to different categories like arid, semi-arid, subhumid, etc. So the dry lands include arid, semi-arid and dry subhumid regions. Humid regions is where the water vapor content is more. They are called as dry lands. So dry lands are more at the risk of becoming desert. They can easily become desert. So what will be the possible places? It will be the lands marginal to the existing desert. We will tell like deserts are expanding. So the marginal areas can become desert and the size of the desert increases. Also certain vulnerable regions like hill regions where rainfall is very less, and they can also become dry lands very easily. Such ecosystems will come under most vulnerable category. and there lives the most poor people in the world. For example, in Sahara desert region, Sahara belt, it has more number of poor peoples compared to any other region in the world, because their land productivity is very less. So what the people can get from the land is also very less. So it is end up in a cycle of poverty. How we will approach this problem? This is a slowly encroaching problem. It is not like the sudden onset of a cyclone or flood, nothing like that. So desertification is a slow process. It is a slow process, and it will slowly encroach upon the land, and people will slowly migrate. They will migrate from these regions to other places. So migration, poverty, distress, stress, like this are associated with the desertification. So how we can address this? The only way is sustainable land management. We have to carefully plan the land use. So in a water scarce areas, we should not go for water gushing crops. We should not cultivate more crops that need more water, right? We should go for the varieties that is suitable for that ecosystem. That is about managing the agriculture in this region. Similarly, we should go for water harvesting, conserving the water bodies, conserving the water, reducing the water use. Such kind of land and water management is very important. That's what this convention is trying to implement these regions. So it needs a bottom-up approach. These activities should start from the local level. Local people will be involved, local ecosystem will be handled, and each place will be having different requirements, right? So we can't go with same size fit or approach in this kind of problems. According to the region, we have to come up with the local solutions and local participation to address this. So this is one of the peculiarity of this convention. It is stresses upon the bottom-up approach. So it has relation to agriculture, forestry, land and water management, and poverty alleviation. Now what happened in this COP? What were the major outcomes? Countries have come up with a technical guide on LDN. What is LDN? LDN is land degradation neutrality. That is, we have to achieve a neutral point. We should not lose more land. Why this land? It means amount and quality of the land. Amount of land that we have and quality. Quality means how productive it is. So we have to achieve a balance. This neutrality, in a way, it denotes the balance. How the land will be providing certain ecosystem services. It will be providing food to the people. So for giving food to the people who are surviving there should be certain capacity for the land. So to ensure food security, we need certain amount of land. Considering the population there, we need a certain amount of land, and that land should also be having enough quality to support that much food production, and for supporting other ecosystem services like shelter, medicine, or we have seen about different ecosystem services like agricultural support, pollination, shelter providing, like that. So this ecosystem service and food security that the region needs, and the land we have should be able to give. So this is the balance. If that land is not able to supply these essential services, we can tell like land is degrading. So we have to conserve the land resources for achieving this neutrality. So this technical guide is for the countries how to effectively manage the resources and how to get finances to restore the degraded land. New Delhi Declaration is rather a statement of consensus that has arrived during this COP, and in that 35 decisions are legally binding on the parties, and the parties have generally agreed upon that there is a relation between climate change, land degradation and biodiversity, and they have agreed upon the importance of the people. People should be placed first. who are the local people should be placed first when they are dealing with this land related things. And there is an important thing like land right. So because the land is losing, land is degrading, many people are deprived of land, so the government has to ensure the land rights of the people. And since land is a limited quantity, there is always conflicts about that. So economically and politically powerful people will be getting access to this land resources. But as for sustainable development, it should not happen. So there should be cooperation between the civil society, people, NGOs, government, etc. to achieve this objectives. And we have a International Day for Combating Desertification and Drought. It is observed on 17th June every year. Theme of this year is Let's Go Future Together. And about the estimates of desertification, by 2025, 1.8 billion people will experience absolute water scarcity and 2/3 of the world will be living under water stressed conditions. So in India also, in many places during summer we will face water stress. India is one among the major water stressed countries in the world, and India is also a part of this dry lands. Major part of India comes under the dry lands. There exist the most vulnerable people, poor farmers in India. And this desertification is a slowly encroaching natural hazard. It is slow. It is not like the onset of any other natural hazard like earthquake or floods. It is a slowly encroaching hazard that makes people to migrate. And another aspect is that if the land is restored means the potential of the land is restored, it can support vegetation, and that land can store more carbon in the form of biomass and more carbon in the form of soil carbon. So it helps to mitigate the climate change impact also. Next topic is forest landscape restoration and Bonn challenge. So this is a minor topic. Let's just go through it rather fast. Bonn challenge is a global effort to bring 150 million hectares of deforested and degraded land into restoration by 2020 and 350 million hectares by 2030. So it is a challenge on the governments to take up this and restore their forest land. It was actually launched in 2011 by government of Germany and IUCN, and it was later endorsed by the United Nations Climate Summit in 2014. So during Climate Summit, they have asked other countries also to take up the challenge. Accordingly, India has taken up the challenge in 2015 Paris Summit and has pledged its challenge, and that restoration challenge that India has pledged is one of the highest in Asia. So this forest land restoration means it is a process to restore the ecological and social functionality of the land and also the well-being of the human beings across that land. So this also has relation with the land degradation that we were talking before, UN Convention to Combat Desertification. This will also help in both desertification aspect and also the climate change aspect, because forest lands can sequester more carbon in terms of the biomass of the trees. Trees can store carbon for a long time. So this FLR is not just about planting trees in the deforested areas. It is about restoring the whole landscape. Landscape is the whole land that forest is existing. It will be having water bodies, it will be having forests, it will be having a mountain. That a mountain may be a watershed. What is meant by watershed? It will be a source of rivers. So it will act as the source of rivers, and all this kind of functionalities will be there in the land. So forest land restoration means restoring the functions of forest as well as the functions of that land. So it involve planting more trees and ensuring the health of trees It is involved in landscape because it involves the watershed and the government there, countries there, many land users, etc. are involved in that. Restoration means it will try to bring back the productivity of the region and the people should be benefited. It is a long-term challenge because these activities will take more time. So when we just plant today, it will take time to grow. Once the plant grow to become a forest, it will take more time. To achieve that the biodiversity and other functions, it will take some more time. So it is a long-term vision. Long-term visions, and this vision will help the local people to enhance their livelihood. They will get jobs, income, they will get resources. Also, it will help in carbon sequestration. So, more carbon will be stored in the biomass and it will help us to mitigate the climate change impact also. So, in this type of topics, you can expect questions like carbon footprint, carbon sequestration. So, whenever you are coming across this kind of topics, you just concentration on the term used. What is the neutrality, what is excess, what is less, what is footprint. So, we have got one question on carbon footprint in previous ESE questions. So, there can be a question on carbon sequestration. Right, but there can be a question on what is restoration. So, this kind of terms you should be taking note of while reading this news. Last topic in this video is CITES. CITES is also an international convention that is making it important and its scope also happened this year. Now let us see what is CITES in general. That will be enough for this exam. CITES is the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora. So it is an international agreement to regulate the worldwide commercial trade in wild animal and plant species. So there exists trade in the wild animal and plant species like monkeys, turtles, elephant, tusk, rhino horns. So this type of items have great demand in the international market. Some people believe in its medicinal value, some people likes to keep it as trophy, some people like to keep wild animals as pets. So this kind of trade is endangering their lives. So there is restriction on the trade in these items that is dealt in this convention. It restricts trade in these items made from such plants and animals, either for food or clothing or medicine or trophies. They have restricted because the trade will endanger that animals. It will push them to extinction. This is the international treaty administered by United Nations Environment Programme, UNEP. So who is party to the convention? It is legally binding. They have to modify their national laws to come in terms with the CITES conditions. And in CITES, different plants and animals are categorized. So it will tell which category of plants the trade is absolutely banned and some other category where precaution has to be taken. For example, in Appendix 1, there are species that are in danger of extinction. So it prohibits the commercial trade of these plants and animals except in extraordinary situations. Appendix 2 is that are not threatened with extinction, but it may suffer decline in number if trade is not restricted. So trade should be restricted. The quantity of the items that is traded should be restricted. So it means the governments can issue certain permits so that everybody cannot trade, only people with the permit can trade that items in limited numbers. Appendix 3 is about some countries may be requesting to protect certain species. It may be having ecological relevance to that country or religious relevance to that country or cultural relevance to that country. But if a country is asking to protect certain certain species, they can include in the Appendix 3. So they can request other countries to take measures to protect it. So what happened in this site? India, Bangladesh and Nepal was trying to delist sandalwood from this list because sandalwood Trade is prohibited because it is an endangered species, and India was asking to delist it. Why? Because it affects the livelihood of many people. Many craftsmen will be depending on the sandalwood for making their livelihood, and it is an important variety that is found in Indian subcontinent. So these countries were requesting to remove it from the restricted list. So this kind of deliberations will happen during the conference of parties. Different the parties to the convention will be convening together. They will take decisions on this matters. So with this, we are winding up the topic on international conventions. So far, these many international conventions were in news either through their COPs or involvement of India. So accordingly, this becomes important. That is certain COPs that has come up with major outcomes, or it was conducted in India, or India has participated with the new initiatives like that, will be more important in exam point of view. So we have discussed the previous year questions that have come, and for the possible questions, please refer to the monthly hyperloops and also the test series questions.